Good evening, everyone. My name is Michaela Smalley. You're here at the Basketball Embassy's International Coaches Summit, and tonight we have an amazing speaker. She is the head coach of the Atlanta Dream WNBA, and tonight she's going to be speaking to us about creating your defensive identity. She's a fantastic coach and a fantastic speaker. So when you're ready, Coach, go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. You guys don't know this, but Michaela was an intern for the Dream last summer. So making connections, excited to be on here. Ironically, you know what the world is looking like today when, I got DM'd on Instagram and asked to do this. And, it's just amazingly, regardless of what level, we're all in this pandemic together. And it's really hard to say to growing the game, especially when it means sitting in front of your computer for a half hour, an hour, or finding ways to help younger coaches. Basketball for me has been pretty much everything, from when I first fell in love with the game as a sixth grader to, playing in college and playing overseas and coaching in college and meeting my husband and having kids. And, this sport has pretty much meant everything to me. So any chance I get to give back, I love to do it. So hopefully we've got a lot of coaches out there that feel the same way. So, I'll kick this off. I did a similar presentation for the Texas High School Association last week. And, certainly as I talk, please submit questions. I think we learn best when we're asking questions, and I have the ability to do Q&As. I'm a hands-on person. I love to speak and be on the court and be able to show not just what we do and why, but how. And I think that's a little harder to do in this scenario. So hopefully everyone follows along pretty well. But if you have questions, I'll take questions until we don't have any as we get closer to the end. So please submit your questions and we'll learn a little bit together. So you'll see at the end too, I have my email and ways to reach me if you have more in-depth questions about any of the things that I talk about tonight. So I think when you talk about really building your defense and, you have to ask your question, it doesn't matter if it's offense or defense, there's certainly different ways that you may choose to play. And it starts with, what are your expectations? Do you want to be a team that's defined by your defense? Do you want to be a team that is creative defensively? Do you want to be a protection team? Like, you have to figure out what your expectations are first. And a lot of times, as big as a question as that is, then you kind of step down from there and say, okay, well, first of all, it doesn't matter whether you're an AAU team, you're a high school team, you're a professional team, everybody at some point inherits a roster. And then you certainly can build on that roster, whether it's through recruiting or free agency like we did. But what does my roster look like? What do I have to work with? Do I have a small lineup and that's going to dictate how we play? Do I have a big guy inside that I want to funnel everything to? And so I just firmly believe that you build your defense starting with your roster, and then you build a system. And then as you want to adapt, you can certainly then add players that adapt to your system or make your system better. For me, when I first became a defensive coordinator, which really isn't a term used a lot in basketball, but I was lucky enough when I was working at Arkansas to be asked to be the defensive coordinator. And for me, what that looked like was I'd certainly been around the game for a long time, but to be put in that position, I really basically studied. I studied some of the great defensive minds in the game. Two of my favorites. I watched every tape I could get my hands on with Dick Bennett and Tom Izzo in terms of toughness. And obviously with Dick Bennett, it was pack line and playing the gaps. And I just looked at my roster and felt like at the time, being in the SEC, we were athletic, but we weren't as athletic as the Tennessees, as some of the LSU, but we were more athletic than a Missouri. So we had to figure out what that fine line was, how to use our athleticism to the best of each of their ability, and then collectively how we could be good. We had really athletic small forwards, and we had a really versatile 4-player. And so because of that, I made the decision we would switch everything 1 through 4. We picked up point guards with our 3s. And so a lot of what we did was based off our roster. And so then you have to decide, like, do I want to contain and congest? Some people would say protect. Or do you want to dictate and disrupt? Do you want to be up the line? Do you want to deny passes? Or do you want to congest? Do you want to shrink the court? When the ball's on one side of the floor, do you want to keep it there? And you kind of have to decide what your personal philosophy is on that. The more I studied our roster, the more I studied great defensive systems. I chose to be a containment team. I wanted great ball pressure, and then we built off of that. So always being there for each other in the gaps and really getting them to buy into, kind of all being on a string, which any great defensive team, that's going to be your number one concept. How are we on a string? How do we have, 5 guys moving in harmony? When the ball's in the air, are we all moving? Are we tagging when we need to tag? Those type of things. But certainly we wanted to disrupt at times. And so we added half court and 3/4 court presses, some denial stuff. And then we mix in some scout specific stuff, denying a particular player. Once a point guard that we thought was really important would give up the ball, not letting her get it back. So kind of building on that philosophy and figuring out not just how you could beat people, over the course of a season, but particularly game to game. And then ultimately, how do you convince your team that, defense is a priority? You've got a team that wants to play fast. You've got a team that loves to shoot, wants to share the ball. All those things are great. How do you get buy-in from them? And I think, for us at Arkansas, it happened really, really quickly. I had a veteran team that wanted to be good. And they saw, it doesn't always happen overnight, but certainly, success leads to buy-in. When I took over the team in Atlanta, I knew it could be a great defensive team based on the athleticism that we had, but we really had to build our base out. We had to understand what our reads were. We had to understand situational basketball. But as much as anything, we just had to start with a base. And when we had success and we led the league in defense all season long, defensive efficiency, field goal percentage D, all those key stats, you get buy-in. But I think it starts with making it a priority every day in practice, showing players that you'll take them out of a game if they don't buy in, if they don't sit down and guard, if they miss their rotations. And it all starts with a high level of communication. So let's build on that. So I started talking about this a minute ago. It starts with your base, and I think ultimately at the pro level, or whether you're talking grassroots youth basketball, teaching players to get into a stance is one of the most important things to do. And so sometimes it's as simple as that, teaching them to close out. But ultimately you can come up with a list of probably 10 more things beyond this, but this is a list that I think everybody needs to think about when they're talking about building that base. And it starts with your transition defense philosophy, and some of that's offensive based. You have a great offensive rebounding team. Do you want to send 3 to the boards? Do you want to send 4 to the boards? Do you always rotate your point guard back? I've had different rules at different levels. When we built our transition defense out in college, I really loved what we did. Much harder to do at the pro level, but I'd mentioned it before. We had super athletic 3 players. So we'd send that 3-player to the rim to try to offensive rebound. And if they didn't get the rebound, they immediately tried to find the outlet and tried to get the ball stopped. And their matchup was the point guard. And we drilled it. We really were able to drill these things in practice and get them to understand. I was also lucky enough to have good depth at that position, so I could rotate in 2 different players that were really great at both offensive rebounding as well as finding the outlet and, basically trying to get the ball stopped, 80 feet from the basket, was important to us. We had, for us, it was our 2 guard because she wasn't much of an offensive rebounder. We called that player the hole player, and we sent them back to protect the rim. So shot went up. They were allowed to hold their follow through if they were the shooter, but their first steps had to be back. They'd get back and cover the hole. And then our point guards, we called the rover position. We let them kind of at times search long rebounds and get a read on the basketball. And if not, they sprinted to half court and they were part of that tandem if people were running at them. So, if we got the ball stopped early with our ball hawk, which was our 3-player, then our point guard could match up sooner. We certainly held the hole with our 2 guard until our first post could get back. And then the opposite post filled in backside or got to their matchup, depending on how fast the team was running at us. At the pro level, it's a little hard to dictate quite like that. And so for us, we simplified it at our level, and this may work for you. We just had players that we consider go-gets and players that we think are get-back. So if you've got a player that's an incredible offensive rebounder, we just tell those guys, you're either going and getting it or you're getting back. And it was as simple as that. So at our level, we're going to consistently have 2 back at the pro game and sometimes 3 back. If our post players at the 3-point line, when a shot goes up, I don't like fake hustle to the rim, because about the time they cross the free throw line, the ball is going to be pushed in the opposite direction. So if we're going to the boards, we're going hard, you're going to be a go-getter or you're going to get back. And then, at our level, it's all about communication. It's about getting one of our guys on one of their guys, and, we'll fix it later if we get mismatched. The other thing I strongly, strongly believe in defensive transition, any chance you can get, is to squeeze with your trail post. And so what I mean by that, for people that haven't heard that terminology, somebody had to rebound the basketball. So if a post rebounded the basketball and outlet the ball to their point guard, we don't believe in buddy running. Just because your player got the rebound and is jogging in the trail spot, we want to sprint that post ahead and squeeze the point guard, and kind of make the point guard give it up, or have the point guard always look at an extra defender. So we'll squeeze until that trail post comes in, and then we'll get in our base half court defense. Ball pressure, once again, where are you at? Where are you going to pick up? We picked up early when I was in college. We're more apt to pick up at half court, or depending, just outside the 3-point line at our level. And at our level, we dictate that by sometimes who that defender is. If it's someone that can really get up and bother the opposition's point guard, we'll pick up and we'll dictate with them. If it's somebody that, is not as good an on-ball defender, we're going to have them pick up just outside the 3-point line, and have them dictate at that point, side of floor. And then you're going to have to talk about, where do we push the ball? Are you a team that wants to force the ball to the baseline? Which a lot of teams over time, Duke men's basketball over the years, has been a hardcore denial, send out, funnel everything to the baseline. And our 5-player was very foul prone. And so I did not want the ball funneled to the baseline. I did not want our post players consistently rotating and trying to block shots. So if anything, we forced middle. We tried to help help to the middle, which some people think that's crazy, and I think it can work either way. And ultimately, over time, what I've decided is I really don't want to force either. I really believe in kind of guarding your yard, showing help to both sides where you can, and, just squaring people off and playing player tendencies and using your push step. And so, we just square people off, butt to the basket, and just try to guard our yard, instead of saying, hey, if we're going to get beat, we're going to beat baseline, or hey, if we're going to get beat, we're going to beat middle. And I understand all the reasons for it and the rotation reasons for it. But to me, especially at our level, the less you're in rotations, the better chance you have for players to take contested shots. So much as we can, we want our opponents to take contested shots. I'm going to get one shot. So as much as we can keep them in front of us, that's what we want to do, rather than opening up one direction or the other and forcing rotation. Once again, I've already talked about it a little bit, but do you want to deny one pass away? Are you going to gap? I very much believe in gap. If you watch the NBA, if you watch the WNBA, you're not going to see a whole lot of denial. You may positionally deny a player. You may try to deny James Harden the ball. You may try to deny Maya Moore the ball at times. But, you really are going to get yourself too spread out defensively if you're consistently denying in our league. So a team may deny the trail. They may deny certain things. But for the most part, we're very much a gap-oriented team, and we're playing in a gap-oriented league. so that the great one-on-one players in our league, are constantly looking at help on either side of the basketball. Post D, are you going to be a full front team? Do you want to play dead behind because you got, a 6'11" center, or depending on what level? Are you half or three quarters? I firmly don't have, what I really believe post D wise is, and we have the wider lane at the pro level, but ultimately don't let them get the ball where they want to get it. Force them a step off. So, don't let them settle in and get to the spot that they want, whether it's getting firm early and meeting them in transition, whether it's bumping them across the lane. There's simple things like if a player likes the low block, can you shove them a foot higher? If a player likes to play in the high post, can you play them in such a way that you shove them a little bit lower? And so getting players to play outside their comfort zone and not catch the ball where they want to is my personal philosophy. And it's been that way at all levels, and then we were very much jump behind, stay between the player and the basket. It's amazing how inefficient players are, even from 10 feet to 5 feet, when you've got somebody in between them and the basket. It's when they've got a clean look that changes. In the WNBA, the average team shoots about 55%, 5 feet and in. So just to give you, we were 11th in the league last year inside of 5 feet. So we've got to be better. And then after that, you talk about your screening actions, on your pin downs. Are you going to come up through the inside? Are you going to go over the top and be physical? Are you going to top block? And, some younger coaches, or, they may never get into that because it goes away from a lot of your 1 pass, 2 pass away philosophies and your help side. But oftentimes in our league, you'll top block someone like Diana Taurasi. Like, you don't want them coming clean off a screen. You're going to send them on like a baseline cut to get them away from the screen. And you certainly can always switch actions, I think switches can be really, really effective in a lot of, especially against teams that like to run specific sets. I think when teams are motion teams and they're trained to play against switches. I was lucky enough to coach at Florida Gulf Coast, and they're one of the best motion teams probably on the planet. And, he just really, really taught them how to read screens and what to do to exploit switches, same size switches, and, really all switches. So for us, I came up through the inside in college. In the pro level, we just want to get really physical and fight over the top. And so it's kind of one of those things that we drill regularly in practice, just the physicality that we expect them at what we call the point of attack. So at our level, anywhere, the point of attack is where a team is trying to score, whether it's off a ball screen, off a pin down, off a flare, whether it's throwing the ball through the low post. That's the point of attack, and there's certainly over the course of a possession can be many points of attack. But we've got to go one at a time. So if the action is a pin down, we want to be great at the point of attack. So we're going to drill kind of both our footwork and our physicality at the level of the screen, and then once they get through the screen, the person guarding the ball, jumping to the ball, all those type of things. I'm a big believer in shell drill. It doesn't matter what level. I think that's how you learn the game: 2-on-2 to 3-on-3 to 4-on-4 to 5-on-5. And so really we do a ton of 4-on-4 work. And this is just one of those situations where we'll do a pin down drill 4-on-4 and just battle through 20 seconds on the shot clock and just make them battle through screens. We'll do the same thing with flares. I believe in chasing the flare. There's too many good shooters at our level. If they curl the flare, then it's our post job to drop and show high hands and take away the lob momentarily and then play back up to a post. So that's our personal philosophy of to chase off flares. We may not in the situation where it's a non-shooter. We may go under a non-shooter, but our base defense, and I think when you start talking about a base, you start talking about if you just went out and played and you didn't know what the other team was going to run, but you knew this is how we guard pin downs, this is how we're guarding flares, this is how we guard ball screens, this is how we play post defense, that you're capable of competing, regardless of your opponent. And if you don't have any idea what they're running, you can really put up on the board before the game, just remember our base. We're going to stay with our base here. So this is kind of what we do as far as our base. And then we certainly switch that up based on scout, based on what we're getting beat off of. And then we've got to have counter action. So that takes us to ball screens, and you could probably do, a 5-hour seminar on how to guard ball screens. It's a ball screen. Basketball is a ball screen world now. Doesn't matter if it's the NBA, doesn't matter if it's the WNBA. Certainly you still see collegiate teams running some motion. You see some, whether it's, kind of a pass and screening motion or a cutting motion, or whether it's a dribble motion. You're not going to see that at our level. I don't see that a lot. I watch a ton of European basketball, a lot of Euro League, especially on the women's side, because we have players playing over there all the time. You got to understand how you're going to guard ball screens, and you have to have a base, and then you have to have a secondary. I'm a big believer in the drop. Okay, so we battle over the top with our guard. We shove them into the screen, and then our post is there for support in a drop setting. That's probably the most common if you watch a lot of NBA basketball. We certainly don't have the same size as some of the teams in our league with a Liz Cambage or a Brittany Griner, but Elizabeth Williams is a very good drop player for us at the center. And you'll see some switches. Our league is very much if you've got two forwards, there's going to be a switch. So small forward, power forward, your 3-4s tend to switch ball screens. But our base D, what we'll teach and drill is drop. I'm not a big ice coach. I'm a situational ice coach. I think you can ice more easily if the ball, if the post is coming to screen off the block. So they're coming up to screen rather than, getting the ball in the trail spot and swinging into a ball screen. I think that's very hard to ice. I love to ice an overload set. Anytime you have an extra defender in the corner, and there's really nowhere to go, I'll ice that. But, you see still a lot of hard hedges at the collegiate level. You'll see an occasional hard hedge at our level coming out of a timeout, or a certain player, or you've just got a great veteran defender in this league that just decides in a certain situation, hey, Courtney Vandersloot's hurt us on the last few ball screens. I'm going to jump out, and instinctually they'll do some of that. For us, we drill a lot of trapping. So if our primary ball screen defense is the drop, our secondary defense is a trap. And, this past season, we were statistically very good in our trapping situations. We trapped a lot on side outs. We're a side out league. When 14 is on the clock, you're less apt to get caught in long-term rotations. If a team zippers their point guard to the top, gets a catch, they go into a ball screen, we trap that, we play out of the trap. We don't have to rotate and, kind of scramble as long, knowing that there's typically 14 seconds when that possession starts. So a lot of different ways to play ball screens. In our league, Washington's a great ice team. Seattle's a great ice team. I'm personally, I think when you play out of ice, you tend to, ice can be very aggressive to the ball. And if you'll swing the ball against the ice, you're going to get to a lot of 2-on-1s, especially if it's an aggressive rotating ice action. And so I think, for me, I've always believed at this level, especially, as much as I can keep one of us on one of them, I'm happy. I think the more you get caught in rotations, you're gonna leave somebody open, and it's great if you leave the right guy open, who's not going to hurt you. But at our level, there's oftentimes not someone that you can really leave open. So, I think I was a little bit different at the collegiate level in terms of, wanting to be more aggressive at times, wanting to create more 2-on-1s and make players who weren't great ball handlers, maybe decision makers on the backside. Like, what can I do to get it out of the point guard or primary ball handler's hand and get it to a secondary or another option for them? So that's when I say start with a base. There's certainly more things in terms of your rotations. Where are you going to tag from on screens? And if we talk about tag or who's absorbing, you have to always know, like, if you're going to play drop defense on a ball screen, who's helping on the roll, if your post man gets stuck on the guard coming off the ball screen. And so is it an empty side? Is it an overloaded side? And so all of that changes. So your players have to understand not just that two man in that ball screen and what they're doing, but you also have to understand help side responsibilities and who helps on the roll. So, there's lots of pieces and parts to all of this, but here's a good, starting off point in terms of thinking about things that you have to decide before you start building it and building it your way and building your system. Once you have a plan, now you got to have the language for your plan. So, I think that ultimately the best defensive teams are high level communication teams. They're teams that echo sets, that will communicate to one another. I firmly believe that, just as your point guard is that ultimate communicator at the offensive end of the floor, you can have a different, your center tends to be behind the other four players a lot of the time. And when you have a center who's a loud communicator and is someone that really understands what other teams are running, that's when you can be at the highest level defensively, because you talk about, can we get on a string? Can everybody understand what's going on? Are we talking about our help? Are we talking about who's calling out ball? And you can drill communication. You can drill communication in offensive drill. You can drill communication in 3-on-2s and 2-on-1s. You can do build out drills that are communication drills. And that's something that, your players don't always fall in love with, but you can start with a 1-on-1 to a 2-on-1, to a 2-on-2, to a 3-on-2. You can do build out drills like that where, you can work on offense in terms of playing a numbers game, and you can also work on defense in terms of high communication. One of my favorite communication drills, just from a defensive effort perspective, is 5-on-4, which is really 4-on-5. Put 5 people around the perimeter, put 4 people under the basket, throw the ball out, have them communicate, have somebody close out on the ball, and then, whether you put 15 on the clock and the players have to throw it around and then they can only shoot under 5, whatever that is. But, when you're playing down a man and you're talking about through your decision making in terms of it's a skip pass, who's closing out on the skip, next guy has to get in the gap, but I think those are great communication drills. Always would prefer to be able to show those so you really understand what I'm saying. But there are definitely ways that you can work on communication. And I think with this generation, it's one of our number one responsibilities, whether we're teaching at a youth level, a high school level, a collegiate level, or a pro level, is to really get our players to communicate at a high level, to want to communicate, to see the importance of communicating, echoing actions at both ends of the floor. And then what are you calling things? And do you call it in such a way, whether traps are red or traps are blitz or whatever that language looks like for you, that your players are all speaking the same language, that when you build out your man or your zone, and certainly I'm mainly talking about man and pretty much exclusively man, because, you just don't have enough time to do everything. We don't play a lot of zone in the pros. You're going to see it occasionally, but with defensive 3 seconds, it's hard to really be effective playing zone for long term in a game. You might a few possessions here and there, but for an example, our man-to-man defense was 11. We cut the court in quarters, so if it was full court man, we were 4-11, which meant we were face guarding and we were picking up at 94 feet. If we were 3-11, we were picking up kind of soft pressure, 3/4 court. And we never really did 2-11, but that would seem like half court. It just 11 kind of was that in between half court and the 3-point line, dictating that. For us, our zone was 22, our 2-3 was 22. So if we were in 3-22, we were in a 2-2-1 back to a 2-3, but we were 3/4 court. If we were 4-22, we were full court 2-2-1, but we were face guarding and sometimes trapping and being more aggressive, but then once again, what are you saying when you're on the ball? What do you call out a pin down? Are you communicating when you're through a screen? Even if that language is I'm through, you have to do what makes sense for you. And it has to be something that you believe in and that you'll use. If blue is switch, you need to always say blue. Because you don't need some of your players saying blue and some of them saying switch. So, figure out your language and then stick with that and really get your team to understand and buy into that. I already talked about this before, but just more terminology when I was coaching in college, our transition D, we had the hawk, we had the whole person and the rover. You can certainly name more things as you go along, but build your language, get them to use it, get them to use it loudly. We always talk about early communication, early and loud, so if it's screen right and you're yelling it early and loud and getting your teammate ready. So whatever terminology works for you, you just be consistent with it. And then something that, is probably not going to be nearly as much a part of youth sports. You're really defensively, when you talk about youth sports, you're getting them to get into a stance. You're getting them to understand the difference between being on the ball, 1 pass away, 2 passes away, and that's system based. But I think at the next level, whether it's AAU or a higher level, then you start to talk about, are we going to be a team that is scout heavy and dependent on our ability to scout, or are we going to be a system team? Certainly it's easier to be a system team when you're more talented than everybody else. You can probably be good at anything. But I think it's the whole idea of, hey, we're a team that's going to high hard hedge, and it doesn't matter who we play. It doesn't matter what guard we're going against. It doesn't matter who my post man is. We're going to high hard hedge. Or are you a team that's going to say, no, we're going to go under on this person, and we're going to go over on that person. And that's what I would call, obviously more scout based. I've probably never coached a team that I would consider, the most talented team. We had a very good team when I was at Arkansas, but we weren't the most talented team in the league. We weren't as good as Tennessee. We weren't necessarily as good as Kentucky or at Vanderbilt at times or whoever. But, we were a team that was consistent in our effort, our defensive intensity, and our game planning. And so I really believe we had to outwork and, quite frankly, outcoach oftentimes our opponents in terms of taking an opponent's strengths away. So you can do that 2 ways. Are you taking away, do you understand what the other team runs and you're taking away team tendencies and getting your team to understand when they get in these sets, we're doing this. When they get in these sets, we're doing that. Or are you just sticking to player tendencies? Are we taking away her left shoulder in the post? Are we, cutting off her right hand on the perimeter? Or are you doing both? It can always be a little of both. Most of the time, I said before, when I was at Arkansas, we switched ball screens 1 through 4 because my 4-man could guard anybody. But we didn't have to switch in size. A lot of that was we guarded the other team's point guard with our small forward. Our small forwards were about 5'10" or 5'11". My 4-player was 6'1". So what's the difference between guarding the opposition's power forward with a 5'11" player, or 6'1" player? It's a little bit different at our level. We tend to, when we get in switches, a lot of times we're getting in switches and we're going to get size to the rim, where we keep a post rotating to a rotating post. So if we were to switch 1 and 4, when that 4-player rolls X5, our 5-man's going to take that roll, and we're going to play bump off, and we're going to just keep kind of rotating that whole possession because we just can't afford a 5'6" or 5'7" point guard to try to guard Brittany Griner at 6'9", on a roll, or to guard a 6'4" player that can really score on the low block. So a little bit different in our level. If we're switching, we're oftentimes switching and getting size. But, we are very, very scout heavy in terms of our opponent's, tendencies. It doesn't matter, if a player's right-hand dominant at high school, it's the same at our level. Players still have tendencies. They may do things much better, but they're still going to be, late clock situations. They love right to left crossover. Isolation situations. If they drive right, they're going all the way to the rim. If they drive left, they're going to pull up. So, really understanding our opponent's tendencies, and then ultimately this last question, do you drill concepts or plays? And I think, I believe in doing both. But at our level, you end up at times being forced to hang on to your concepts and what you're going to do against concepts. Certainly when you have, when you only play 2 games a week, or you're playing 1 game a week, and you have the other team's play calls, and you know what they're looking for on every single play, you can sit on actions. You can say, hey, if we take this pass away, then there's no way they can run this set. All that's great stuff. But we'll end up playing 3 games in 5 days, or 5 games in 9 days, or 6 games in 11 days. And, we're always weighing, load management and rest and getting them off their feet. And so sometimes it comes down to, walking through a few of their most common sets that we're the most concerned about in terms of what we'll get hurt on. If we don't walk through it. And for the rest of the stuff, once again, it goes back to that base. And it may not be your base defense that you start with, but you're maybe saying to yourself, okay, this is what we need to know going into this game. Hey, with Washington, they're going to run a million different plays, and we're not going to know the play call, but we're going to top block this action. We're gonna guard pin downs this way. We're gonna chase Christy Tolliver off flares, and we're gonna switch ball screens with Deladon. And you take concepts or actions, and you really drill those actions and really get your players to understand how you're guarding actions, because you're not in that moment gonna know every play that they're getting ready to run, and you're not gonna know what they're running on an ATO. And so really them understanding the base, or understanding personnel, or there are times when you say, okay, Washington, who is our, league champion this year, runs a million different sets, but ultimately it's going to end up most of the time with Christy Tolliver and Deladon in a ball screen in the slot with 3 players away, and they may be doing some false movement. They may just be spacing, but at the end of the day, that's what you're going to see over and over and over again. So instead of going over, 42 blue and 3377 and 411 this, like, all we're going to do is really drill, okay, how do we cut the court in half? How do we cleanse, in our league, with defensive 3, you have to cleanse the lane after 3 seconds. So are we going to cleanse ball side, or are we going to cleanse weak side? And so, really getting your team to like shrink the court, to have somebody at the nail, to force 2-on-1 on the backside, just so that, for instance, Christy and Elena are looking at a team set up to guard that slot ball screen. Now, they may make a play, that they were the best in the game, but, really understanding the concepts that you're going to see through the course of the game, and boiling it down to those. So you may have the smartest players, or you may not have players that are quite as smart, but they can all get to the point where they understand, I got to lock and trail on a stagger screen. I've got to get physical on a pin down. And, we're going to guard ball screens in a drop and get through and over the top. But this guy, hey, we can go under on, because she's a non-scorer. And so, I will, from there, basically open it up to you guys. Here I put on my Twitter handle if you want to DM me there, or Instagram, and accessible via email as well. I'm pretty good at responding pretty quickly, but depending on how many I get, certainly it may take me a little more time. It's a pretty good time to catch up with me right now because don't have as much going on. Hopefully we'll get some good news on our league sooner rather than later in terms of a start time, but happy to answer any questions anybody has. You're on mute.
Okay, try that again. So thank you so much. That was really, really great. We do have some questions.
Okay.
Start asking. Guys, if you have anything that you think of while we're asking our questions, please just put them in the Q&A box, and then we'll read them off to Coach. So the first one we've got here is, what do you recommend to young athletes that are like, I can shoot, I can play, but I need to get better at defense. So what can I do as a young athlete to get better at playing defense?
Yeah, I think defense, the main thing on defense is about, really being able to get into a stance. I think teaching players offensively or defense that the first 3 steps are important. They're important if you want to win the offensive transition battle. They're important if you want to win the defensive battle. But it's about, I coach women. I'm sure we have a lot of coaches on here that coach guys. They more naturally get into a stance. That's something that we're always fighting, the idea of getting into a stance. I think teaching them to move their feet and really have a push foot, communicating at a high level. I think that, we always look at players as, okay, this is a player who, is a high level defender. And, but there are players that can be great help side defenders. No one talks about, Sue Bird or Christy Tolliver as like this magician, defensive minded on ball defender, but they're fantastic help side defenders. They're great nail defenders because they have high basketball IQ. They know where action's going. They're proactive in their rotations, and so you can be a great defender whether it's you're somebody that's a great shot blocker, or you're somebody that's a great on-ball defender because you have great quickness and you can get your hands. But I think active hands, active feet, really understanding, being proactive and moving when the ball's in the air. It's something that players at every level, male, female, are so reactive in terms of, oh, they're watching the ball. It's the concept that we're still teaching at the pro level that you teach the first time somebody puts on a pair of basketball shoes is the concept of ball me man, and pointing at both. And so getting players to be able to see both, to be in position to see both, and as silly as it sounds, whether you're saying pistols out and you're pointing at both, we have a ton of ball watchers in the pro. There are players that just tend to watch the ball. There are players that are great on ball defenders and terrible off ball defenders. There are players that are great off ball defenders, and boy, when they get in an action, we just want to screen the heck out of them because they're terrible on ball defenders. So, finding your niche, but really it starts with footwork. It starts with communication and kind of understanding, and competing. Like defense is, at the end of the day, your attitude and your effort go a lot further at the defensive end than they do at the offensive end.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of players that play in the league that are from other countries. So are there some things that you might have seen, like say, for example, like with Maite? She's from Spain. There's, of course, others that are in the league, but are there any things that you notice about their defense that are different from what players from the United States do? Like, do you notice any different tendencies on defense? Like maybe the way they play or the way that they think about the defense? Is there any difference?
I think that's a good question. I think that you use Maite as an example. I think she was obviously trained at a high level through the Spanish national team. I first saw her play probably at the U16 level with the Spanish national team, but I think a lot of her development was still coming, at Oregon. I think the beauty of the international game is it's been positionless for longer than the American game. Defensively, I don't know that you would say, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of time. I'm more apt as a coach. I love to watch the international game, but I'm more apt to steal offensive stuff than I am defensive stuff. I think that the open court concept, the spacing, all of that is great. I think for Maite, she was by far Oregon's best perimeter defender. We knew she would be solid at our level. She is not the quickest player in our league. She's not the fastest player on our league, but she's very intelligent and she understands angles. And so sometimes the idea of understanding who your opponent is, understanding their strengths, and then being able to angle off. Okay, I can't get as tight on this player. But Maite is someone that's just so good at taking angles away. And so she's excellent on the ball that way. Off the ball, she's intelligent in terms of, understanding when a pass is going into the post and when she might be able to go in and dig things out. So she's really, really instinctual. And I think from a spacing perspective, I'm sure she got some of that playing internationally. I don't see, I watched a lot of EuroLeague basketball this year. I still see a ton of like high hard hedges. And then that is constantly forcing rotations. So, it's just not the world that I play in or want to like live in as a coach. But it doesn't mean I don't see value or I don't see great effort out of those players. I just think, when you take a post and have them jump out and hedge, if you're a good offensive team and you can move the ball to the open player quickly, it's hard to get that post back recovered in time, against a team that really moves the ball well. So, I watch a lot of it. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that would be my answer.
No, that's a great answer. And then just going off of that a little bit more, as far as, having some foreign players that are playing in the league, you talked about language, like the language defense and communication. Of course, communication being something that has to exist to have a good defense. Do you ever find yourself, or maybe your coaching staff, with having to create some keywords because of language barriers or anything like that?
I've been lucky in that I feel like basketball kind of has an international language. And so many of these international players, even when they play overseas now at our level, they're playing in countries and their coaches are either speaking English to them, or, they have a translator. And so, most of the international players I've been lucky enough to coach, certainly know English and know the basketball language. We may have a different terminology, just like, a lot of our terminology comes from the NBA. And I've had players or college coaches come to my camp and say, why do you use that word? I use Kelly Graves as an example, in one of the talks I gave. One of the best coaches at the collegiate level, or at, quite frankly, any level. But I had breakfast with him last year before our season started, and we were talking, and I was talking about how Maite, one of the things we loved about her is she understood ball screen reads, and we started talking about it, and he stopped me at one point and he said, I listened to you, and he said, it's like you're speaking a foreign language. He's like, you have a term for everything. I brought it up earlier, but we talk about, some teams will call it a tag, some people will call it an absorb, and he said, I just started running high ball screen action at Gonzaga because I had Courtney Vandersloot, and I needed to like let her play, and the amazing thing is he teaches all the things that we would teach. They just don't have the same terminology. But certainly when you understand the actions, it's as long as you're consistent with that terminology, the players pick up on it. I mean, I've coached when I was at Louisville, actually, as an assistant coach. We signed a Ukrainian kid and a Russian kid. Neither of them hardly spoke English when they came over, but they would nod their head a lot, like they understood. And I even remember a time when, I could tell one of our coaches thought that one of our players didn't have any idea what he was talking about. So he said, okay, Valeria, next time you get the ball, I want you to dribble in there. She was a 5'9" point guard. I want you to dribble in there and dunk. And she said, yes, coach. Okay. Yes, coach. And everyone started laughing because, there's that tendency, especially when foreign players first come over and they don't have as good an understanding of English, that, they just kind of nod their head and tell you they understand when they don't. And so, I think it's important for any player when they come over and in any program and at any level that, you have the kind of relationship with your players, or your staff does, that players aren't afraid to ask questions when they don't know, because there's nothing worse than players who think they know and they don't. And so really having those open communication lines where, if you are doing something that they don't understand. I had Damaris Dantas 2 years ago, who's Brazilian, and, her English was better than she would admit to. I think she understood. She didn't love to speak it. She wasn't as comfortable speaking it more to her teammates than she what would have been like in a media situation. But when you play enough basketball, and sometimes she would just say, oh, like once you would explain what you wanted, she absolutely understood concept, but like sometimes reiterating the word that you're using, because she'd say, coach, you just speak so fast sometime, which clearly I do. And I get going and I'm high energy. And so the octave goes up, in certain situations. So being able to slow down, having your players be comfortable asking the questions when they don't understand.
Sure. Are you seeing any new trends or new actions that are making their way into the women's program as far as offenses or defenses? And what do you need to work on in that case as far as defending in a new way for that new action?
Yeah, I think we started talking about this a little bit before, but I think when you watch the NBA, and certainly I watch a ton of NBA basketball, and a lot of it is just for me to learn. We have a lot of the same rules. They certainly play 8 minutes more than us, but the 24-second shot clock and things like that. And so a lot of the trends that we have come from the NBA. Certainly, I have a lot of NBA coaching friends that talk about how much European basketball they watch. And a lot of that is, the European game has been more positionless for longer. Their big guys have, played on the perimeter. And by guys, I mean males and females. It's kind of a gender neutral term to me. But, it's, I think when you look at the NBA, how important it is for spacing reasons. Like, as I watch actions that I love that Denver runs, or that Utah runs, or some of these teams run, you have to think about like your personnel relative to their personnel. I don't have a Dokic, I don't have a point center, that we're going to play to and play through, and is going to be a great decision maker. So some of it is weighing, like, but you see like how important it is in the pro game for everyone to be able to shoot the three, and the analytics of the game and how that's changed how we play, how we think about playing. It's about, are we taking enough shots inside of 5 feet and then shots behind the arc? And can you spacing to get those shots, to get effective shots from those two areas? And it's certainly harder to do if you don't have 5 players on the floor, who can shoot it, or, and so a key part of, when you look at the NBA game, you may not have centers in the league that are 40% 3-point shooters, but if they can shoot high 20s or above 30% and just create that spacing and stick one here and there, and make a corner three because it's the shortest three, then your offense opens up. And so when you watch the trends, you see interchangeable parts. You see Giannis bringing the ball down the floor and going, okay, is he the 4 right now, or is he the 2, or does it matter, and they're able to run their actions inverted, or, and Washington's a perfect example of that in our league. They were a team that when they would play Emma Miesemann and Deladon kind of in those post positions, they can handle it, they can pass it, they can shoot it, they can isolate on the low block. So you've got some of that. The difference in our league is we still have some of the traditional centers. We've got Fowles and Griner, that are so good at what they do and need the ball 8 feet and in. And so there's a different balance in our league than the NBA. But I think if you're talking about a trend, you're talking about just us following the analytics. I mean, there's no Houston in the WNBA, as far as like living on the analytics and really keeping the ball. But I think the less you can turn the basketball over, the more shots on goal you get, the more you take high efficiency shots. You got to let certainly good mid-range shooters kind of still do that, but as much as your inefficient shots, kind of taking those away.
You kind of went into talking a little bit about Cambage and about Griner, and when you're defending some, when much bigger ladies that are in the post, with a smaller team as well, like you said, you got to make them uncomfortable. They like playing on the block, pushing them up a little bit. What are some ways that a team that might be at a size advantage can get those types of players, especially if you know how they are as far as their personality, not to get them out of their comfort zone as far as they're playing, they're shooting, but getting them almost out of control, like maybe
you want to make them uncomfortable as much as you can. You want to make them uncomfortable, and that's not easy to do, but I think some of it's tendency, as much as I can, I'd prefer to play one-on-one in the post, even with a disadvantage. It goes back to my philosophy, even with an ice and a rotation, If Griner can consistently look out of a double team because she's so much bigger and can play to 2-on-1s on the backside, are you going to get burned? But I think you have to be able to drill and teach double teams. I think you have to be good in them. You have to know what you're going to take away. We very much simplified our double team defense in terms of who was going, and then our help side is just basket next. So we want to deny the pass back out, the easiest pass, and then our two guys on the backside are just basket next. So someone's taking the basket away, so any high-low drop that player gets, and then if the ball comes out on a skip, then that's our next player will get that, and then we'll rotate out of it. So you have to drill that. I think you can come from different places. I think you can dig off certain places and certain people. And so if you're at least disguising things at times, it's not easy against those guys. There are times when Griner can get in such a rhythm and she can just turn and shoot over you. And so can we at least get her to shoot over us at 12 feet instead of 10? Can we not let her turn into our face, and do certain things like, do we want her to turn to the baseline instead of the middle? I mean, it's certain things like that that are important against those players. And sometimes it comes down to, my second year when I was coaching at Connecticut and was a defensive coordinator there in our league with Griner, it was all about, we'll let her get 40, but we're not going to double team her. We're going to make her make shots. We're going to rebound misses. And, we were able to beat them once with that mentality. You can't always do that. It's all going to come back to how many touches is she getting? Because sometimes you get to the point where too many touches, you're going to get hurt, but if the ball's playing through there and she gets 15 shots, then you can live one-on-one 15 times. If they throw it to her down there 40 times, you're going to have trouble, on an efficient night for her beating them. If you play her single up and they throw it to her, 30 to 40 times on the block.
Sure. And you talked about some of the drills and things that you do at practice as far as working on building defense, building team communications. But somebody asked if you could just go into a little bit more detail on what the drills are and how you use them to get the desired effect on defense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in starting oftentimes with just a closeout drill. It's a continuous closeout drill. We'll put 2 minutes on the clock. Just to get their feet moving. Now, you got to get into the mode too, where you start to, it could have been on the base defense philosophy sheet in terms of, I've always believed in, short choppy steps, close out, high hand, butt down, take away the shot, be prepared for the drive. You're seeing more and more of, kind of the fly by closeout, especially in the NBA on corner threes because of the efficiency level out of the corner. So I've been doing a lot of studying on that and different coaches' philosophies on the closeout. Like, I'm questioning at times, are we closing out too short? Should we just be running them off the line as opposed to that controlled closeout? But I think from a closeout drill perspective, you still want them to drill, kind of short, choppy steps, high hands, and then we skip the ball and the next player comes out and they just kind of rotate and play and they drop the help and box and then move to the next line. We do that with one dribble, then close out, a coach or a practice guy or somebody has one dribble, pick it up, dead, skip it, so that's a progression drill that you can do a lot of things out of our closeout drill. So we always are going to start with that. And then, for the most part for us, then it turns into 4-on-4. So it may be simple, 4-on-4 shell when we're teaching pass and cut, we're teaching, punching gaps off the bounce and playing out of the gap. And then, we'll take that at a very stationary and basic level, and we'll build that out and say, okay, now today, but we're cross screen, down screen, which is super common at every level. So we're going to guard those two actions. And then, we're going to, bump high and go low with our post, or once again, another thing you can put into your base philosophy. How are you going to guard cross screens, little on big, cross screens, post to post, all those kind of actions. Are you going to extend on the backside? You have to build those ideas out. But then we try to build in things that we're going to see consistently. So 4-on-4 with a stagger screen, and then we're going to make them guard the stagger the way we want them to guard it, and then we're going to let them play live. So it becomes both a defensive and an offensive drill, and that's how we can both use our players, and it not always being against the practice guys. Now all of a sudden our players are trying to score, and these are actions that we're going to run, they're actions they're going to see. So we tried to build out that way. We have continuity, ball screen drills where we have 2 posts on the low block and 2 guards on the wing with a coach at the top. I'll initiate with a pass on the wing, and then we ball screen and we play whatever ball screen coverage we're working on at that time. Is it our drop coverage? And then the post is coming over to the weak side, and the weak side guards on the nail. They work on getting over the screen, doing it right. They swing the ball to the other side. We close out. We do it on the other side. And we go back and forth and back and forth. And we'll do that with traps. We'll do that with hedges, kind of whatever we're working on that day. So, I think at the collegiate level, when I have more time, then there are some, a little bit more individual drills, warm-up drills, more of your 3-on-2s. We tend to build those type of drills into, because our training camps are short and then we don't have a lot of practice time once the season starts. How can we combine drills and have it work 2 ways? So maybe it's just 11-man break, and it's a way for us to communicate our rules, and we're tandeming defensively, but we're really working on getting good shots that we would want to get offensively. Are we 3-on-2 plus 1? And we love that drill in terms of communicating and getting back in and taking advantage of that, and so those are drills. It's hard to talk through all the drills we do, but big believer on 4-on-4.
Okay, and we got one last question in the comments. You've got 6 days to decide on a final roster. And someone asked, how in these unprecedented times, how will the Dream go about deciding on who to retain by 5/26, as it is a very competitive league to gain a spot without training camp, without preseason games?
I mean, it's a lot of staff Zooms, since we're obviously all remote right now. It's somewhat of a gut decision. It's somewhat of an analytic decision. It's somewhat of a, for us, we think about, okay, so you got 12 players on your roster. And if you look at a WNBA box score at the end of the night, you're rarely going to see teams consistently play more than 9 players. So I think most people could look at our roster and say, between our guaranteed contracts, which are guaranteed to make the team, the Tiffany Hayes, the Renee Montgomery, those guys, and then when you're thinking about the combination of rookies and training camp contracts to finish out your roster, you're thinking about character. You're thinking about who, as simple as it sounds, like you have ways to finish out your roster where it's about who's going to be ready in 2 years, but that'll understand the growth perspective and will be a good teammate and is going to work regardless. You're going to look at, I think you're going to see a lot of players, and whether it's the Dream or other teams, experience is going to trump youth a lot of times, unless you have cap issues or you see cap issues going forward. Because as much as you'd love to see some of these new and young guys battle in camp, when you know you're not going to get that opportunity, we're all going to trust players that we've seen that have done it, who've been there. So it's going to be some combination of, the roster being filled out in a way that makes sense short term as well as long term. And so but it's not easy. I mean, some rosters, I think you can probably just go, okay, there's their 11 or there's their 12. I think most people look at our roster and say, okay, there's their 9. And then who's she going to like after that, and who fits. And so we've got some decisions to make for sure.
Thank you so much, Coach. We've enjoyed having you. Fantastic presentation. And guys, if you want to follow Coach or shoot an email to her, the question, she's got her socials right here. But if not, join us again tomorrow for our next sessions. And Coach, when the season does roll around, best of luck and stay safe during this pandemic.
Thanks you guys, appreciate it.